Well, good evening and welcome again to everybody. Wonderful to have you all join us as usual. My name is Alan Friedman. I'm Vice President of the Australian Jewish Association and your MC for this evening. Also visible, as you have seen, David Adler, who is President of the AJA, and Mordechai Kedar, who we will introduce in a moment. So good evening to you as well. As usual, the format's pretty much the same. We'll be speaking with Mordechai for about 30 minutes. After which time we will open up the discussion with a live Q&A session from the audience. So as I always like to remind you, please have some questions ready so that we don't end up with a flurry of people all wanting to ask a question at the end of the night. Now, just a reminder also to please signal your intention to ask a question by clicking on the participants tab at the bottom of the screen. Then you click on the raise hand icon. If you haven't got that, then you'll have a green tick. And what that does is send us a signal that you're interested and we'll put you on the list. As usual, the chat function is functioning, so feel free to use that. And as David mentioned, we've muted everybody just to prevent all of those annoying noises during the first half of the program, but we will allow you to unmute yourself for the Q&A. Okay, Michael, take it away.
Thanks, Alan. Now, Lieutenant Colonel Dr. Mordechai Kedar is a senior research associate at the Begin Sadat Center for Strategic Studies and a lecturer of Arabic and Middle East Studies at the Bar-Ilan University. He served for 25 years in the IDF military intelligence, specializing in Arabic culture, politics, media, and Islamic groups and Israeli Arabs. Mordechai speaks fluent Arabic and has studied the Quran extensively. He's an expert on the Muslim Brotherhood and other Islamist groups. Mordechai is described as one of the few Arabic-speaking Israeli pundits seen on Arabic TV channels defending Israel. He has a reputation for not holding back and is definitely not politically correct. That's why we love him. This refusal to toe the Jewish communal party line has irked some of these Jewish community leaders in the UK and even here in Australia. Mordechai is a highly sought after speaker around the world because, unlike many other commentators, he speaks fluent Arabic, has studied Islam, and is far more knowledgeable on how our enemies think. One of Mordechai's career highlights, in my view, was his heated debate on Al Jazeera with a Syrian religious scholar over Trump's moving of the US embassy to Jerusalem. I strongly recommend everybody check this out. It's on the AJA Facebook page. So it's my pleasure to introduce Mordechai Kedar to the Australian Jewish Association. Mordechai, shalom and welcome. It's nice to see you again. You can hear me?
Thank you so much, Michael. And Can you hear me?
Yep, keep going. Yep.
Okay. I thank you very much, Michael, and I also thank Alan and David and each and every one of the participants who is here today and will watch it later, because I see that some people are recording it. Probably will upload it on the net, and it's okay. Very good.
Yes. I think the last time we saw each other, Mordechai, we had a beautiful lunch in Jerusalem, if you remember.
Of course,
that's
with some good friends of mine and yours.
That's
It was beautiful because Michael paid for it, I think.
So you owe me a lunch.
Of course.
All right. Now, tonight's topic...
And it was in the Mamila.
That's right,
yeah,
Mamila.
In one of the good restaurants in Mamila.
Well, I only take you to the best places, Mordechai. Tonight's topic is the Abraham Accords. So I'm now going to hand you over to our President, David, to begin the discussion. David.
Thank you very much, Michael, and thank you, Mordechai Kedar, for making yourself available to AJA this evening. Now, can we begin, Mordechai, with you telling us actually what is the Abraham Accords? What's the status of that terminology?
Well, I think that the Abraham Accord is actually a brand name which was agreed upon between the State of Israel and the Emirates, the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain, as a kind of a seal of approval, historical, and could even be religious, seal of approval for the relations, or the new relations between Israel and these countries, as if, or to show it as if it is something which both children of Abraham, means the descendants of Isaac, we, and the descendants of Ishmael, they, are actually renewing the good relations which they might have had in the, in those days when Abraham was alive, or right after his death. When, and as you know, already the Bible tells us that in spite of all the differences between Isaac and Ishmael, after Abraham passed away, Ishmael and Yitzchak buried him together.
They reconciled, that's right.
Means at the end of the day, at the end of the saga, there was some kind of unification between Isaac and Ishmael, the sons of Abraham. And apparently those who thought about this name, or this brand name of today's relations, actually hints to that reconciliation, I would say, between Isaac and Ishmael. And now the descendants of both are reconciling their relations as well. So I believe this is it. And actually, yeah.
Well, one of the things that you and I have in common, and I'm delighted that we've got a couple of commonalities, is that we've both actually written articles on this subject. So no, that didn't come up well. Okay, you've recently written on it in the for the Besser Centre, published just yesterday, where you describe a change in the Arab world. My article was published in the Spectator magazine, which describes it as a game changer. Now, are either of us exaggerating? Is this actually a substantial shift?
Well, this is actually the bottom line of a big shift in the Middle East, which takes place already for years. It's not something which, came about like a month ago. And what do I mean? For years already, the Arab world is divided, sharply divided, between two coalitions. One coalition is led by Iran, which is not even an Arab country, Islamic, but not an Arab one. And the states which are part of this coalition, the Iranian coalition, are Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Qatar, and Gaza, the state of Gaza, which exists already for 13 years. And this coalition is supported by Turkey, Russia, and China. This is one coalition. The other coalition, which is vis-a-vis this coalition, is Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Egypt, to extent Jordan, Morocco, and lo and behold, Israel. And all these countries in the second coalition share the fear from the Iranian hegemony. All the rest of the Arab countries, by the way, Lebanon, I mentioned one of the first coalition of Iran. All the other countries are somewhere in between, like Oman, who tries to bring both sides to some kind of reconciliation. Kuwait, which is too much afraid to join the Saudi coalition because they are right under the paws of the Iranians. So this is actually the situation in the Arab world, not from today. It is already for years. And what was changed now is that the Israeli participants in the second coalition now came to before the scenes. All the time it was behind the scenes, because Israel's presence in the Gulf is already 15 or 20 years, which Israel is there, whether for intelligence or for operations or all kinds of different operations and maybe business as well. Look, I know one of the lawyers of the most prominent law companies here in Israel, the Herzog Neeman. They work with the Gulf for 15 years already, and they don't even try to hide it. Yes, because just like Israel was selling irrigation equipment to Jordan back in the 50s and the 60s, 30 years before the peace with Jordan was signed in 1994. Okay, there are between Israeli companies and Israeli organizations, all kinds of organizations, behind the scenes with all kinds of Arab countries when it comes to their interests. So what happened actually last month or 2 months, that the relations between Israel and this coalition of the countries, which all have the coalition with Saudi Arabia, actually this Israeli participation is now clear, now open, now is open for more cooperations like economic cooperations, research cooperation, academic, arts, theater, films, all these cooperations which Israel has with all kinds of countries like Australia, United States, so forth. So this is what was changed recently. Yeah.
Okay. So it's largely security driven, but there might be a commercial element as well. The way you've described it is largely the security interests are dominant.
Look, what actually combines Israel with these countries is let's say the fear.
Yeah.
Yes,
okay.
The fear
now,
from Iran.
There's a couple of entities which we haven't mentioned yet, and I'd like your comment on how they are affected. And that, of course, is the Palestinian Authority, Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, the other groups. They have, of course, been screaming objections. What happens to the power shift now with the PA and Hamas?
Well, first, let's put it this way. The Palestinian issue became something in the margin during the last, let's say, 5, 6, 7 years, especially since the eruption of the Arab Spring in late 2010. Why? Because the Arab countries, which beforehand were overwhelmingly behind the Palestinian cause against Israel, as we saw through the years in the Arab Summit decisions, since the Arab Spring started, spring in brackets, 10 years ago, the Palestinian issue became something in the margin, because the domestic issues, domestic problems in Syria, in Iraq, in Libya, in Yemen, in Sudan, ISIS became a problem which is overshadowed the Palestinian problem. And during the last 10 years, people in the Middle East realized that this problem of the Palestinians is not their worst problem. This is one thing. Second thing, the Palestinians succeeded with the time to make their cause something which people do not want even to bother with. Why? First of all, the divide between Hamas and the PLO, which erupted 13 years ago when Hamas took Gaza over by force, by killing the security people of the Fatah, of the PA. So, and don't forget that there were attempts of Saudi Arabia especially to reconcile between the Fatah and Hamas, especially in March of 2007, when they tried to, when they made them sign an agreement in Mecca, right in front of the Kaaba, the holiest place of Islam, that they are going to make peace with themselves. Before the ink dried, they already started to shoot each other.
Yeah.
So the Saudis are flabbergasted, are very angry at the Palestinians because they did not obey the orders of the king, of the Abdullah, who was the Fahd, and Abdullah the king, to make a reconciliation between themselves. And this is actually was like a slam in the face of the Saudi king, but by breaching the agreement which he forced them to sign in front of the Kaaba, okay, from all the places in the world. So they actually, the Palestinians, their behavior, vis-a-vis each other, made all the others look at them as people. Excuse, what do you want? If you fight each other, what do you want us to do for you? Now, another thing which came, I'd say, the last 5 years, the Palestinians kept claiming that Israel occupied their homeland.
Sure.
Recently, some information came out that, and the one who actually heralded the herald of the occupation is the Al Jazeera channel, which broadcasts from Qatar, which anyway, Saudi Arabia hates them because they are in bed with the Iranians. Al Jazeera is run by a man named Jamal Rayan. Jamal Rayan is a Palestinian guy who was born in Tulkarem, not far from my home. And his family ran away from Tulkarem to Jordan. You'll know why. And in Jordan, he became an activist of the Muslim Brotherhood. So the King Hussein kicked him away and he went to Qatar and he became the mastermind of Al Jazeera. And he is there since 1996 when Al Jazeera was launched. And until this very day, this Jamal Rayan is the chief editor of Al Jazeera and he's the one who controls everything there. And he actually leads the anti-Israeli, anti-Zionist, anti-Jewish message of Al Jazeera, which we can see day and night. Recently, it was found out that his father, Mustafa Rayan, was actually a real estate agent before 1948. And he personally sold thousands of dunams, very large lands, to Jews in Eretz Israel.
Good on him.
Means the assets of the family come from his father's treason when he sold lands to Jews.
Okay.
And now you understand why he had to run away from Tulkarem, because people knew what his father did. And if his father could not live anymore in Tulkarem since this information leaked out, and he had to run away to Jordan. And recently, thanks to the social media, pieces of newspapers from the 30s and the 40s leaked out. And now Jamal Rayan has to explain to the whole Arab world how come he is such an activist against Israel while his father actually sold lands to the Jews. Means now you Palestinians, you want us Arabs to liberate the lands which your father sold to the Jews. Okay? Now, the last thing on earth which an Arab wants to be is what we say in Hebrew, friar. I don't know how you say it in English. Somebody who can be cheated. Arabs do not want to be cheated. So leave us alone with your plight for your Palestine, which your father sold to the Jews. So, okay. So when Arabs realize that much of the Palestinian plight for their help is actually based on such lies or such things like real estate agents who sell lands to the Jews, so leave us alone with your problem. We have other problems, and good luck with the Israelis. And this is actually what today some countries, especially the Saudi coalition, tells the Palestinians, you better sit with the Israelis, come to terms with the Israelis and leave us alone. We have much worse problems like the Iranians, and Israel actually can maybe save us or help us with the challenges which we have with Iran, and good luck.
I want to play a short video of a prominent person who disagreed with you, Mordechai, and in the light of what's happening in America, this is highly significant. So some people will have seen this, some will have not. Let's go.
There will be no separate peace between Israel and the Arab world. I want to make that very clear to all of you. I've heard several prominent politicians in Israel sometimes saying, well, the Arab world's in a different place now. We just have to reach out to them. We can work some things with the Arab world. Deal with the Palestinians. No, 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 and no. I can tell you that, reaffirmed even in the last week as I have talked to leaders of the Arab community. There will be no advance and separate peace with the Arab world without the Palestinian process and Palestinian peace. Everybody needs to understand that. That is a hard reality.
Okay, so that's John Kerry a few years saying there can't be any progress unless we, come to arrangements with the Palestinians, Mordechai. Now, the big, I mean, obviously he's completely wrong, and events have proved him completely wrong. But the real question that I want to ask you arising out of that is there's a US presidential election in a fortnight where, there is a completely, to me, it seems a completely different philosophy between one outcome and the other. Given the integration of the Obama administration with the Biden people, what's your view on things going forward as a result of the two options that will occur in America in a fortnight?
Well, my answer will be a commentary on what John Kerry said. What he said was right. At that time, in 2016, when he was speaking, he was right. Why? In those years, as we all remember, the American administration did whatever it could in order to embolden Iran. They gave them the nuclear agreement. They never thought about any sanctions on Iran. And they gave them the big money which Iran needed in order to spread terror all over the Middle East. Therefore, he knew that since Iran is so frightening because of the American attitude to Iran, he knew that nobody will dare do anything with Israel without the Palestinian issue being solved. And therefore, when he said this in 2016, it was right because of the behavior of the American administration. Then comes Trump and changed the behavior totally, put sanctions on Iran, gets out of the JCPOA, never mind money. So Iran today is much weaker than what it was 4 or 5 years ago. And Iran is weaker to a degree that the Emirates and Bahrain, which are under the nose of the Iranians, allow themselves to normalize the relations with Israel. Not only peace, normalize means every possible cooperation, because they know that the Iranians now are weak because of the American sanctions and the JCPOA issue. Saudi Arabia knows it also. So Saudi Arabia gave a green light to the Emirates and to Bahrain to go forward with Israel. Saudi Arabia did not join it because Saudi Arabia is waiting to see what will happen in November 3rd in the United States, whether who will win. Because if Biden wins, I expect, or I am afraid, that much of the normalization between us and the Emirates and Bahrain will be, let's say, frozen. They will wait because they will want to see what will Biden do in order to embolden again Iran on the expense of Saudi Arabia and the other countries, and Israel, of course. And this actually answers your question. If Biden changes or goes back to the policy of Obama and embolden again the Iranians, whatever is now between Israel and the Emirates and Bahrain will be either frozen, I'm not saying canceled, but definitely will not see the warmth as we see today between these countries and Israel, because they are right under the hands, somebody would say the paws of the Iranians. They don't have a buffer zone like us. Look, we have a buffer zone like Iraq. It means Iraq and Jordan between us and the Iranians. They have nothing. They only have the Arab Gulf or the Persian Gulf between them. And with short range missiles, the Iranians can convince them to change their attitude to Israel. And it doesn't take much. And as we remember what the Iranians did to the Saudis in September 19, like a year and a month ago. In one night, they destroyed like half of the oil export ability of Saudi Arabia within one night. Did you hear about retaliation from Saudi Arabia or from the United States? Maybe what came later with Soleimani was some kind of retaliation. Okay, so this is the situation. Iran is frightening the people in the Gulf way much more than they frighten Israel because of various reasons.
I've got two final issues. Two final issues before we open it up for questions. The first is we've seen an extraordinarily warm reaction, particularly from the people in the UAE, the Emiratis, linking up with Israelis on social media, hotels arranging kosher food, musicians learning how to play the Hatikva. What's been the reaction of the Israeli Arabs, not just those that are in the citizens of Israel, but also those that are resident in Judea and Samaria? We know that their leadership has been against it, but do you get any feel for how the average Arab in Israel is reacting to the change of relations?
Well, depends whom you ask. If you ask the Knesset members of the joint party, as they called in the Knesset, they are all against any peace with anyone in the Arab world as long as the Palestinian issue is not solved.
Sure.
Because they actually represent the Palestinian Authority in the Knesset, the party in the Knesset.
Yeah,
the people, means the men in the street, in the Arab street here in Israel, some of them follow this line, but many of them are totally against it. Why? Because they expect that the relations with the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain will give a boost to the Israeli economy, to the Israeli businesses. And they are suffering now very much, like everybody else, because of the coronavirus and its implications on the economy. So they hope that the new relations between Israel and the Gulf will bring more business. After all, they speak Arabic and they can very easily go there and, feel at home. And so the man in the street is much more in favor of these relations than the leadership or the representatives in the Knesset. The same thing is in Judea and Samaria, within the Arabs who live in Judea and Samaria, aka the Palestinian Authority. The authority is overwhelmingly against, especially Hamas, against these relations with the Emiratis and with the Bahrainis. While the man in the street, again, is not so much against it. First of all, he is against the PLO. Today, the Palestinian Authority is viewed as the enemy of the people because of their malfunctioning in the coronavirus and because of the corruption and because of many reasons. They are now, people who want to be Israelis. The Arabs in Judea and Samaria, when they are called the Palestinians, would rather be Israeli citizens than be independent, because they know that the dysfunctioning Palestinian Authority will turn into a dysfunctional state if it becomes a state. In the good case, it will be dysfunctional. In the bad case, it will be under the Hamas rulership, just like Gaza. And this is the last thing which they want. And they know already that Hamas won the elections of 2006. So through democracy, Hamas could take the West Bank over as well, or by coup d'etat, because they remember how Hamas took over Gaza from the PA by force, by shooting the policemen, as it happened in June of 2007, 13 and a half years ago. Means that the people in Judea and Samaria, what people call the West Bank, are very much afraid that the Palestinian Authority will turn into a Palestinian state, which will turn in its turn into a Hamas state. So when they have the choice between being an Israeli citizen or being subjected to Hamas, or even to the Fatah today, the choice is very easy. They prefer to be in Israel. So this is what happens now, and they much prefer the peace between Israel and the Emirates and Bahrain, because again, because of the business which it could bring to them with the Israelis.
Okay. Now, the final point that I want to cover, and it's one that you and I have discussed before, and I'm sure you'll recognize this. Can you?
Yeah, we can see it.
It's a present that Mordechai Kedar gave me when I was in his home. It shows and we discussed the politics of Har HaBayit. And one of the things that we published recently was this stuff. Is it up? Yeah. Which was taken around 1890, and it shows the Dome of the Rock area in disrepair. There's a hole in the roof, etc. And of course, it didn't seem to be of much value to the Islamic world at that stage, but when the Jews arrived, it became of much greater value. Now, is there anything in the Abraham Accords, and I know M.K. Smotrich was trying to drill down on this detail, anything that affects the administration of Har HaBayit?
Well, it is mentioned vaguely that everyone will be able to come and pray in the holy sites. Of course, the Palestinians are against it, and actually yesterday I put on Twitter a clip which shows how a Palestinian actually curses a group of Emiratis who came to pray in the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And it's not new. It happened 2 years ago with a Saudi guy who came to Jerusalem, and it happens again and again whenever they understand that somebody is from Saudi Arabia or from the Emirates. They start cursing, they throw rotten food at them or chairs as they did to the Saudi guy. But it's not new. Already in 2003, the Egyptian Minister of Foreign Affairs, his name was Ahmad Maher, came to Israel to visit Israel and to negotiations with Israel about something. and he went to pray in Al-Aqsa. So when the Palestinians understood that the man is the Egyptian Minister of Foreign Affairs, they threw their shoes on him, which is very, very humiliating thing, because, you know, shoes are dirty because wherever you go, and they're stinking. So throwing shoes at an Egyptian minister, I believe that for years, the attitude of the Egyptian government to the Palestinians was very bad because of this incident when they throw shoes. So this is what happens here. But don't forget that the whole thing about praying in the Al-Aqsa is a very, very politically charged issue, because the one who comes to pray actually represents not only the religion of Islam, he represents the Islamic rule over the place. So if you come to pray there, if you are Egyptian or Emiratis or Saudi, it means that you demonstrate your rulership over the place, while the Palestinians want to appropriate for themselves the rulership of the place, and on this they struggle with Israel. So this is what is behind. It's not just a prayer that you come to speak to God or to Allah. It's a very, very highly politically charged, the place where you pray and the place where you come to pray. So this is why the Palestinians always behave in such a way when people whom they don't like come to pray in Al-Aqsa. And I really don't recommend that Israel starts to push into this equation Saudi Arabia as well, or the Emiratis, because there are so many parties who are involved already in the Temple Mount, which is Jordan, which was given an official status in the peace agreement between Israel and Jordan in 1994. We have the Islamic movement here inside Israel, which is the Ikhwani group, when it's Muslim Brotherhood. We have the Hamas, already active in Jerusalem. Yes, we know people who are representing Hamas in Jerusalem. Of course, they act nicely, but we know that they represent Hamas. We have Turkey, big time in Jerusalem, not big money in Jerusalem. And we have Saudis, because Israel apparently asked them to also to start, being part of this party, and the Emiratis and others. This is such a mess between Muslims about the Jerusalem, and I think that Israel should tell everybody, get out, we are running the place, because this is under Israeli sovereignty. And since Israel is the sovereign on the Temple Mount, Israel should make it clear to everyone that we are the people who run the place. You guys stay out. We are running, but unfortunately, Israel doesn't do it, because Israel is afraid of all kinds of states and problems in the world. So Israel tries to juggle between them, and so far, I'm not sure that Israel succeeded, because every time and again we can see another party or another group comes in. One time it's the Turks, one time it's the Saudis, one time the Jordanians, one the Islamic movement, and the local Jerusalemites, the Arabs who live in Jerusalem, also think that they have what to say about this. So it's such a messy issue that I would recommend that Israel keeps them all out and Israel runs it by itself.
Excellent. Well, I think we should open things up for questions, Alan. We did start a few minutes late, and we can go a few minutes over.
Okay,
let me just think another very important person who is here. I just noticed Debbie Robinson, a good friend of mine. Thank you, Debbie, for being here. And yes, I would answer the questions.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so question time, everybody. Now, we've had some very interesting questions on the chat group, but I have got some people with their hands up, so we'll take those first. If anybody who put a question on the chat feels that it may have been answered, well, then that's fine. If not, by all means, put your hand up and ask it personally. So I've got Ron to start with, then Hugh, Reuven, Mush, and Leon. So Ron, we'll start with you. Please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Good evening, Mordechai. Thank you for coming. It's a pleasure to have heard you this evening. Just a couple of things I would like to ask you. The first thing is with your, given that Egypt and Jordan, the peace agreement is between governments, but the people, the average grassroots Egyptian and Jordanian has hatred towards Israel, and the Israel Philharmonic has never been to these countries. There's never been really, sports and cultural exchanges. With that kind of reality, why doesn't Israel use people like yourself, certainly yourself, with your Arabic debating skills, to do more to engage with the average Egyptian person? And the other thing I wanted to ask you, you mentioned about the marginalization of the Palestinian people. When people are victims, they have always mostly a rescuer, and this role is played by the European Union. What can Israel do about that? Because it keeps the conflict going and bubbling with the Palestinians, who are given hope all the time and money by the European Union as well.
First question about the normalization between us and Jordan and Egypt. First of all, don't forget that unlike the Emirates and Saudi Arabia and Bahrain, we share borders with Jordan and Egypt. And through the years, we had wars. And in wars, people get killed. So there is a group of people in Egypt and Jordan who lost a father, a son, a husband, a brother. And the sediments of those times, those wars, definitely exist in both Egypt and Jordan. While Saudi Arabia, except for a little force which they sent to fight us in 1948, they don't have this group of people who personally were hurt by the wars between them and Israel. Not to mention the Emirates and Bahrain, who never took part in any fight against Israel. So this thing doesn't exist in those countries, while it is exist in Egypt and Jordan. And this is a problem, and we cannot ignore this problem. Secondly, don't forget that with the years, having good relations with Israel means in Arabic tatbi'. Tatbi' means normalization. In English, it's a neutral word, but in Arabic, it's a very, very bad word, because through the last 70 years, anyone who was doing anything with Israel was accused to be mutabbi', means normalizing relations with Israel. And this is why in the Arab discourse, in the modern Arab discourse, this word tatbi' means normalization is a very, very bad word. And still the people in Egypt and Jordan are still captive of this discourse. While the people in the Emirates and Saudi Arabia, they don't feel that they have anything against this word of normalization. They would rather normalize with Israel than with Iran or with other Arab countries. So this makes the peace of today different from the kind of peace which we signed in the 70s and in the 90s. We are talking now about different generation who are much more knowledgeable, who do not buy the propaganda against Israel by Al Jazeera and other state media, because they today have the cell phones or the satellite TV, which they can intercept Israeli TV channels as well. So they are the people of today, which are much younger than the people of new generation. Their way of thinking is rather different from the way of thinking of a generation ago in the Arab world. By the way, another reason for the Saudis not to join the Emirates and Bahrain is that in Saudi Arabia, the king, who is 82 or 83 years old, he is still a king. While those who make decisions in the Emirates and in Bahrain are much younger. So this actually represents they represent the new generation of the Arab world who think in a different way. So this is actually what explains, in my view, the difference between the peace which we have now with the Emirates and Bahrain on one side, and the peace which we had in the 90s and the 70s with Egypt and Jordan.
Okay, thank you. Next up is Hugh. Now, everybody, please keep your questions as short as possible. We're running a little bit, we'll probably go a little over time, but we do want to get through as many as possible, so keep them short if you can. Hugh, please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hello, Mordechai. Thanks so much for hosting me in your home last year. It's often said now that the European Union is actually more pro-Palestinian than many of the Arab countries are. Given the current situation with the Abraham Accords, what future do you think that the PLO has, and especially as it still has its charter active, and the central platform of its charter is the destruction of Israel? What do you think what sort of future does the PLO have as an organization?
Well, so far we didn't see significant changes in the status of the PLO, especially in Europe. In the States, yes, because as you might know, President Trump closed the representation of the PLO in Washington, D.C. They actually called it an embassy, but since the PA is not a state, there's a question if you can call your representation an embassy, but they called it an embassy. Trump closed it. So, but no European country followed this step, and still, as much as as you can see, the PLO is still viewed as the one and only representative of the Palestinian people. Where is the problem? The PLO now is being challenged heavily by the people themselves, means by the Palestinians, as they call themselves, and especially the clans in Hebron, in Nablus, and in other cities as well. This is something which I keep claiming for many years, that the clans have much more power than the PA itself. Because of various reasons, it deserves a whole lecture, how the Arab societies work and what is the role of the clan in the Arab sociology and politics as well. Now what we see, a new movement of clans in Judea and of Arab clans in Judea and Samaria, what people call Palestinians, who actually want to liberate themselves from the PA because they do not want to be part of this failing state. And actually, I'm talking about this for many years, but through the last couple of months, this issue gets a real boost. And do not be surprised if you wake up in one morning to hear that a city in Judea and Samaria, like Hebron or Nablus or Jericho or any other city, announced its independence from the Palestinian Authority. This is what, in my humble view, we are going to see. And in this case, who represents that city? The PLO, which is actually the umbrella of the Palestinian Authority? Not at all. There will not be Hamas, there will not be Fatah, there will be the local clans of, like, they will have like an emirate, like Andorra in Spain, like Luxembourg, like San Marino. I'm not sure that this will be like Victoria and New South Wales, but definitely this can be some kind of a federation of clans, of emirates, which will replace the Palestinian Authority. And actually, this is what I'm writing about for many years, the Palestinian Emirates, which will emerge from under the ruins of the Palestinian Authority or the Palestinian state. In my humble view, this is the only thing which can work in the Arab world because of the clannish character of Arab societies, because of the various reasons, which, David, if you want, I can give you a whole lecture about. This actually what will make real peace between Israel and those people. Because when they have the framework of a clan, they don't look for external enemies. The states, which are built regardless of the clan framework, these states look for external enemy. And lo and behold, the Arab Emirates now have normalization with Israel. Not in vain, because a country or an Arab country, which is based on a clan, just like the Emirates in the Gulf, does not need an external enemy. Also, this is only, in very short, what I expect to be in the Palestinian Authority.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Reuven, then Mush, then I've got 5IG and Gary. Reuven, please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Mute. Can you hear me now? Yeah. Okay,
fire away, Reuven.
Okay. Two quick questions. First question, I'm referring to the Har Habayit. In the Me'am lawyers regarding the Akedah Yitzchak, it says that Abraham. Well, the commentary is that when Abraham took Yitzchak up, he left his donkey with two servants, and it said that the two servants were Ishmael and Eliezer. Now, I heard from various sources that according to the Quran, it was Yitzchak and Eliezer were down, and the Abraham actually took Ishmael up. Have you heard anything about that regarding the Quran or your studies of the Quran? Obviously, it's the Torah is the truth. But,
well, it's not in the Quran; it's in the Hadith, in the oral tradition. Yes, according to the Islamic tradition, Abraham did not bind Yitzchak, but Ishmael.
I see.
Means their ancestor, not the Jewish ancestor, Yitzchak. Okay, I call it an appropriation of a Jewish belief and Islamization of a Jewish belief.
Okay.
And there are many other Jewish beliefs which were Islamized by Islam.
Sure. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
The second.
Reuven, you've muted yourself. We'll have to come back to you. We'll let somebody else have a go. Mush, I think you were wanting to ask a question. Please unmute yourself. Mush, can you unmute yourself?
I don't see Mush there.
Yeah, it's under Leah Trevish. Mush, did you want to ask a question?
Yes. Two questions. Number one, the fact that Bibi Netanyahu doesn't seem to have reached out to the Democratic leaders before the elections. Any comment on that? Number two, the very controversial here in Israel, the fact that Saib Erekat is being treated in Hadassah and Karen.
Of course. Look, what we can see for years already, that Netanyahu actually had a gamble on Trump. And whether it is wise to do it or not, we will see in the 4th of November. Because if Trump wins, Netanyahu will come out as the winner as well, because he actually put all his eggs in this basket, as we say in Hebrew. If Biden wins, the game will be different. No doubt we are coming back to the confrontation between Netanyahu and the American president, as we saw through the 8 years of Obama in the White House. And this is regarding Netanyahu. Now, the question about Saib Arikat. Yes, there are some people in Israel who are, raise a brow. What do you mean treating this man? He is part of the PLO. He wants to eradicate Israel, and there are many recordings of the man cursing Israel, calling for BDS, and do whatever he could in the name of the PA against Israel. This is on one side, and yes, they are right. But on the other side, when somebody needs medical care, you don't start questioning. Israel took care of jihadists in Syria. Of course, they were injured. They were brought to the Israeli-Syrian border without anything, only with bandage. And of course, Israel took them to our hospitals and treated them. Sometimes we made them artificial hands, artificial legs if they needed. And Israel didn't ask questions if they are from Al-Qaeda or Nusra or Egyptian or Syrian army or wherever, or some villager who didn't have anything to do. Okay, you don't ask questions. If somebody needs help, you help him. And this is the humane way how to treat somebody who needs medical care. So, and those who side with this kind of behavior also have a point when we are trying to look. Let me tell you something. A couple of years ago, Israel took care of the daughter of Ismail Haniyeh, the Hamas leader. She was pregnant and she needed intensive care in order to keep her pregnancy. And she was brought to Israel from all the places in the world. She was brought to Israel, and Israel saved her pregnancy. And apparently later she gave birth to a new jihadist. Okay? So did Israel do the right thing or not?
Yeah, it's hard. Okay, we'll move along. Okay, Leon, I think you were next. And I've missed Dennis before. So Dennis, and then 5IG and Gary and Miriam if we've got time.
Oh, good evening, Dr. Kedar. Can you hear me?
Yep, fire away, Leon.
My question is this.
Very clear.
What motivated Obama and still motivates the Democratic Party to empower Iran?
Well, I wrote a whole essay about this. If you can find it, it is in English. If you Google Mordechai Kedar, my name, and the Islamic plan of the State Department. This is, I believe, this is the title of that article. I think it was written already in 2014 or 13 even. Now, in very short, America, after the 2001, means September 11 attacks on America, looked for an answer for the question, why do they hate us? Means why Muslims hate America? Is this because of what we do or because of what we are? And the answer is very important, because if because of what we do, we can change maybe what we do. But if this Islamic hatred against us is because of what we are, it is much more difficult to change. What are we going to change? Our liberalism, our materialism, our drinking of alcoholic beverages? Okay, so, or our permissiveness, are we going to change it? So this question, and I know about this question because I was asked the same question, and I wrote another essay for this. When Obama came to power, he thought, or he believed, that Muslims hate us, means Americans and Westerners in general, because of what we do. Now, what do? We support the rulers like Mubarak and Assad and King Hussein and all these oppressors of the Islamic movements, and we support Israel. And and this is what we do. And in order to be beloved by Muslims, we can change it. We can betray Mubarak by throwing under the bus when the Arab Spring started. We can change the policy vis-a-vis Israel. and we can be much nicely to Muslims like the Iranians and the Palestinians and all the others, and especially the Muslim Brotherhood organizations. And this is actually what Obama did. He was in favor of the Muslim Brotherhood taking over Egypt. He supported Morsi, the Muslim Brotherhood president, who was elected in mid-2012 and ruled for a whole year. And when Sisi, the current president, kicked Morsi out, Obama kept calling him day after day to reinstall Morsi as the president of Egypt. Okay? So Obama supported both Iran and the Muslim Brotherhood, Iran on the Shia side and the Muslim Brotherhood on the Sunni side, in order to be beloved by the Muslims because he supports those organizations. Hillary Clinton once said, quote, "Our Qatari friends keep telling us that the Muslim Brotherhood is a peaceful organization." Okay? This is what she said. Our Qatari friends, and Qatar, don't forget, are in bed with the Iranians, and the Qataris are supporting the Muslim Brotherhood big time, Hamas and all the derivatives of the other derivatives of the Muslim Brotherhood. And Hillary Clinton kept saying all those days, when she was a Secretary of State, that our Qatari friends keep telling us that the Muslim Brotherhood are a peaceful organization. Apparently, what's her name? Hillary Clinton did not do the first thing to check what is the Muslim Brotherhood. And the first thing to do is to look at their emblem. Can I show something? Yes, I can show. Let me show you guys. Let me show you the emblem of the Muslim Brotherhood, so you can decide by yourself if this is a peaceful organization or not. Let me show you. The emblem, here it is. Okay, let me go back to Zoom and to share the screen with you. Here it is. Do you see this?
Hasn't come yet.
Can you see what?
Yeah.
Do you see it?
Yes.
No, I'm not. Maybe some people are seeing it and some aren't.
It's the two swords.
Oh, here we go. There we go. Now we're right. Yeah, the two swords.
Okay. The two swords. So what do you mean a peaceful organization? One sword for the hugs and one sword is for the kisses? Okay. Apparently, she didn't do the first thing to check what this organization is by looking with her own eyes at the emblem of this organization. Okay, so this is what I'm, it's to tear your hair out. These people are so ignorant. It's never mind what Kerry said, what even Clinton said, and this is what these people believed to a degree that the CARE people, CARE means Committee on American Islamic Relations. This is the Islamic AIPAC, which is was very active in the days of Obama, and the people of CARE came in and out the White House day and night. They were pulling and pushing the American policy day and night. And even one of the closest advisors of Hillary Clinton was the daughter of one of the two leaders of CARE in America. So what do we expect? Okay, so this is what I mean by being a captive of the Islamophily thinking of the State Department, which later became, in the days of Obama, also the White House. So, and I'm afraid that when Biden will come back, they will again approach the Islamic most radical people in order to make them love America and love the West. Appeasement, This is what I call appeasement.
Okay, thank you. Now we are pushing against time. Dennis, if you can unmute yourself, and then we'll go to 5IG, and we'll see how we go.
Oh, okay. Right, can you hear me? Yes. My question is slightly different. It relates to Turkey. Erdogan is an Islamist. He is extending his power, threatening Greece, threatening Cyprus, threatening Libya, and also extending into the Mediterranean to restore the past glory of Turkey and the Ottomans. How do you see this as a threat to Israel and as a counterweight to Iran?
Well, so far they more or less cooperate. Not always, but in many cases they cooperate, Iranians and the Turks. Not on every issue. In the Nagorno-Karabakh war, which is these days, Turkey supports Azerbaijan, while Iran is supporting the Christian state of Armenia. So it's not always they are together. However, Turkey, but it deserves another lecture, is actually a country which repented and came back to Islam after it was established almost 100 years ago as a secular country under the rulership of Ataturk, Mustafa Kemal Ataturk. He tried to create a secular state. He changed the script from Arabic script to English with some additions. He closed all the madrasas, all the Islamic schools, and he destroyed mosques, and he changed many things which were connected to Islam in Turkey to be totally secular. But the problem was the demography. The rural areas, which remained rather Islamic, kept making children because, traditional people, they don't use contraceptives, and they have 2, 3, 4 wives as well, and their demography was very high. While the liberal echelons, who were usually in the cities, have a lower demography, as we know for everybody. Girls do not get married, and if they get married, they use contraceptives and so forth. So after 100 years, you could see that the traditional circles became bigger and bigger, while the modern circles became smaller and smaller. Another thing is that the liberal, modern, more educated circles tend to migrate to other countries, to Germany especially, but to other countries as well. While the traditional circles, they don't tend to go to the infidel countries, they stay more in their country. So if you add all these things, you can understand that by the 90s already, the Islamic part of the society was bigger than the secular one. So Erbakan, the teacher of Erdogan, came to power in the mid-90s. Then he was kicked out by the Supreme Court, which was the last bastion of the liberalism in Turkey. And Erdogan was elected in 2003 after he made a whole demonstration eating during the Ramadan in front of everybody in a press conference during the day. So when people saw him eating during the Ramadan, taking out a sandwich and eating it in front of everybody, so people said, it's okay. He is not such an Islamist, he eats in Ramadan, and we can let him be elected, and it's so forth. Later, he said that this was some kind of a deception in order to deceive everybody in Turkey and outside from Turkey to think that he is not such an Islamist because he was eating on Ramadan. And in Islam, there is a rule which says, el-darurat bih al-mahdurat, means the necessities make the forbidden allowed. Means the necessities allow the forbidden. means since it's forbidden to eat on Ramadan during the day, but the necessity to convince all the others actually makes it allowed for one time to eat in front of everybody. So this is Erdogan by deception. He became the president, and now he started to change the Supreme Court and the army and all the devices which were created by Mustafa Kemal Atatürk in order to keep the secularism of the country. Erdogan changed. So now the country came back to Islam, repented to Islam, and this is actually what happened in Turkey, and all the rest is the history.
Okay, look, we'll take one more question. I'm sorry to those who won't get a chance tonight. We've gone way over time, and it's been fascinating, and we can see that just about everybody's still staying with us. So we've got our last question is from 5IGHVY. If that's your banking password, then 150 people now know it. So please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Good evening. My name is Bob Tribetz. A few months ago, we've been listening to Amir Aviva, the founder of the Protectors of Israel. He proposed a new state solution, a Palestinian state adjacent to the Gaza Strip. He would create 6,000 square kilometers. Do you think there is any viability in this? Is it fantasy today, and could it be a reality tomorrow, or do you think it's just a dream?
Well, during the last, let's say, 3 or 4 decades, I saw at least 10 plans which are more or less showing the same thing, that some land from Sinai will be annexed to Gaza, some land from Israel will be annexed to Gaza. You know, because people in the West usually, or Muslims who live in the West and adopt the Western way of thinking, think that the problem is a territorial problem. And if the problem was territorial, we could solve it by territorial solutions. But the problem is that the Israeli or the Jewish Islamic struggle over this country is way beyond territorial issues. It's about history, it's about religion, it's about beliefs, about many things. So, you know, according to, you know, the pure Islam, Jews have no right to any state in the world, because Jews should live under the Islamic rule as dhimmis. And I highly recommend that you read the book by Bat Ye'or, Islam and Dhimmitude. Bat Ye'or, a Jewish lady named Giselle Littman, who lives until this very day in Switzerland, she published this book, and I highly recommend Islam and Dhimmitude. And Jews have no right to a state, because Dhimmitude means living under the auspice of Islam. So the problem is not only territory. There is a big question if Jews are entitled to have a state at all, even if it was the size of a square centimeter on the seashore of Tel Aviv or Sydney, okay, in Bondi Beach. Okay, so this is the question. And unless these questions are answered, we are not going to solve any religious problem with territorial means.
Okay.
Okay, I think we'll have to call it a night there, Mordechai. It's been wonderful having you, and we're getting lots of requests on our chat to have you back. So the term by popular demand is very appropriate. So we're definitely going to have you back. And I'm going to record the names of those people that we couldn't take questions from. So you'll get the opportunity first next time. So wonderful to have you, Mordechai. I'll now hand you back to David for the final wrap up, and let us know what's happening next week.
Okay.
David,
Thank you.
one good point about Zoom. Is that I can give now at noon my time a lecture in Australia. Afternoon, I give 2 lessons at Bar Ilan. And in the evening, I'm recording something for the United States. And this is something which we didn't expect for 2020. And, you know, this is one of the advantages. And you don't have to go for a 2 days flight to Australia from Israel in order to give a lecture. Okay, so I think that this Zoom gives us, although it is not the ideal way how to give lectures, yet it enables us to do things which formerly we didn't even think about.
I would agree with you 100%, Mordechai, and for AJA, it's been a great leveller. We've actually become the largest Jewish organisation in Australia on social media, and one of the things that has assisted that is sessions like this. So I'll echo what Alan said, and I hope you'll agree to join us again in the not too distant future. Now, the final thing is just to show people what's coming up next week. Because we're getting very, very close to the US election, we've got an American expert, Matthew Hausman, who's been a news correspondent for a couple of the news services there, who's going to address the subject, who is better for the Jews and Israel? And finally, if you're not yet supporting AJA, there are 3 things we call upon you to do. Like and follow the Facebook page. If you're not yet on our email list, simply send an email with your details to office@jewishassociation.org.au. And of course, we welcome applications for membership and donations via the website. Now, after next week, we're actually not going to have a formal session because on the 4th of November, the day after the US election, which sort of overlaps with the time zone for the US election, is CPAC. And for the first time, AJA will be present at CPAC. I've been invited to be a featured speaker on the CPAC Australia program, and we will be live streaming some of the CPAC proceedings on the AJA social media. So thank you everyone for joining us for a wonderful session. Alan, back to you.
Yeah, thanks, David. I'll just make the point also, Matthew Hausman's a fantastic speaker. Michael and I had him several times on Nothing Left, and he's very engaging. You won't be disappointed. And he's got a lot of knowledge and he has a very good way of delivering it. Okay, folks, that's all for tonight. It's wonderful to see you all here and so many of you staying. But until we catch up with you next week, we'll wish you a very good evening to you all. Good night for now.